So this is really going to deal with how recycling works in South Africa, broadly speaking. And I'd like to invite the panelists, I guess, for our roundtable discussion. Annabé Pretorius, firstly, of Plastix 911. As you make your way up onto the stage, Annabé studied Polymer Science at Stellenbosch University. She just says a long time ago. Annabé, please come up onto the stage. And for being the rose amongst the thorns tonight, or this afternoon. I'm so used to doing an evening show. And after the CSIR and the AECI and the Plastics Federation of South Africa, Annabé formed her own company, Plastix 911, in 2007. And she says she's now just part of the industry. She's the face behind the annual recycling stats. And to get the numbers, she visits at least 100 recyclers every year. So really are at the coalface, dare I say it? Do I connect those two dots? And very plastic oriented, absolutely passionate about plastics, as she says in her CV. So Annabé, thank you very much for joining us. And a warm round of applause, everyone, for Annabé again. And then Chandru Wadhwani, who is with Extrupet, BSc Business Studies graduate from City University, London. He's been involved in the textile and plastics industries for the last 29 years, so well-earned salt and pepper there, Chandru. And 18 of those have been spent in South Africa as part of the Extrupet team responsible for setting up and running Africa's leading PET and HDPE bottle recycling company. So a warm round of applause for Chandru as well, everyone, before we kick this off. So, Annabé, maybe you can just set the scene, set the table for us here, just at a very broad, high level. How does recycling actually work in South Africa?
If we look at it as a plastics industry, you throw your product in the bin. That bin is hopefully collected by Pick It Up where I'm staying, or whatever municipality service you have, if you're part of the 60% that has municipal services. So your bin is then taken to a landfill. At the landfill, there's many, many pickers, and hopefully our waste picker is still arriving. There's pickers then that sort through that rubbish and say, this has value, this has value. He picks the stuff that has value at that stage. That then gets sold to what we call a mini collector, someone with a bakkie and a trailer that buys it from there, that takes it to a waste management company, that then bales it, and I think earlier speaker talked about sort and compact it, and that takes it to a recycler. That recycler has mega millions of rands invested. He then washes it, he chops it up, the other way around, chops it up, washes it, dries it, and turn it into a raw material again. There is a small portion where the waste picker gets it out of my bin already. So it doesn't go the complete long cycle, but he still sells it to the Oka bakkie, and the bakkie takes it to a waste management company. So that long value chain is part of the challenge we have in South Africa.
There are obviously numerous challenges, as was alluded to in the first presentation, around what happens once the waste gets to the dump, how much of it finds itself back in the natural environment. Chandru, perhaps you could just talk to some of those challenges that are currently faced by the recycling industry.
So I think the first fundamental challenge is the cost metrics, whether it's at the front end of what it costs to get it to your plant when we work in informal collection systems. And the second is the quality of that stock once it arrives at your plant. So the rough rule of thumb on a number, just to give it some perspective, is for every ton of PET you pay cash for up front, you're losing 35% in your process before you end up with a raw material. And that's probably reflective of many parts of the world that work on informal collection systems. So even before the first bottles arrived, you're already almost starting from a negative standpoint.
Annabé, how do you see the challenges?
Yes, I think that is a major one, because we depend on a post-consumer product that's in a waste bin mixed with everything else that we chuck in our waste bins. So that is a major. Chandru mentioned 35. That's pretty much an average across the different materials. if it's harvested out of the solid waste stream. So if we can harvest the material earlier on, we can separate at my house already into different streams. That is a challenge. Then we sit with the capital investment. Recyclers really need to invest huge bucks. A small little pelletizing extruder is 20 million. A wash plant is about 20 million. And then you're only going to do one plastic a certain number of tonnages. So the capital is a challenge. We're not stuck with capital. Andrew mentioned energy. You need to use energy to chop it up, to wash it, to dry it. In the case of polyolefins, the drying is really eating a lot of energy. Interesting part of my surveys now is measuring that energy input, and it is still less than producing it from virgin material. So we're still slightly better off there. Transport is an issue. We have big countries, a big country. We need to bring a PET bottle, if we use Chandru's product, all the way from Louis-Trichardt to a plant based in Wadhwani. Because that type of capital you're not going to put up in Louis-Trichardt, because there's not enough bottles in Louis-Trichardt to substantiate a process there. So distance, energy, capital investment, I think those are really three of the major ones. Add to that then the quality of the waste that we get as input into our recycling plants.
I want to touch on the point you made about the two-tier collection system, and obviously better if we separate at source versus off the dump or collected from informal settlements. How have we seen that change? Because there has been an increased public awareness and drive for, particularly in the sort of suburbs, to sort it at source. Is that having an impact?
No, because it's not really happening. And I think we've got to be open and honest about it. It's a wonderful concept, separation at source, and the Japanese do it beautifully, and the Germans. But when you break down into the numbers of what separation at source costs, it's very hard to motivate in parts of the world where resources are limited. We've got housing challenge, we've got medical challenge, we've got schooling, education challenge. I think it's almost where we've got to be open about this subject and realize that what we've got is what we must work with and make it efficient. I would love for there to be separation at source. It means bottles that arrive at our plant would be clean. But I'd be lying to people if I told them I think it would really happen in my lifetime, only because you've got to look at it in the cosmos of all the other societal pressures that we need to devote resources to. But having said that, if you look at what we've achieved on a very informal collection systems, I think we should applaud it, and we should recognize the positive spin-offs. I mean, if you look at the amount of jobs contested, but definitely running into the thousands of people who sadly have been disenfranchised by society or government, and to look at that value we've now provided, I think we shouldn't lose that. And it's a shame the gentleman from the Waste Pickers organization can't be here in the afternoon, because when you see how that value permeates down to that level, you actually realize maybe that's what we need to be focusing on. Obviously, the challenges with it. You don't really want to be encouraging scavenging, but I think the notion of separation at source needs to be put in a compartment for the time being. As much as I'd love for it to happen, we don't really bank our business's future on it actually happening.
I think I agree in a sense with Chandru. It's very difficult to see it happening, but I also do believe we need to start doing it. If there's 5% of the population, according to the official stats from the CSIR, that do separate, what the media calls recycling, that's already making a 5% difference. If each of us sitting in this room and our companies and our employees and your domestic manager at home and your wife and her company starting to say, I'm separating my wet waste from my dry waste, immediately there's a vast percentage of our recyclables that's in a much better condition.
I want to stay on this point for a while longer, because at a consumer level, we all, and it's back to my earlier comment, which is flippant about teenage sex, and everyone thinks everyone else is doing, but in fact no one else really is doing it. But I think consumers all think that every one of their friends are recycling and they're doing the right thing at home. but then go home and don't do that themselves. And this is despite years and years of campaigns on recycle, reuse, and it hasn't made a difference. So, Annabé, as much as you'd like to see that happen, why in your mind have those campaigns to change behavior been so ineffectual? Is it that perhaps in the eyes of the consumer, they see it still as too much of a hassle? Do they not understand perhaps the importance of it? Is the messaging not crafted in the right way? Why are we not seeing it permeate?
I think you mentioned a number of reasons, and I think all of them have some form of accuracy. If I challenge my neighbors, listen, why are you putting all this stuff out? My bin is only on the pavement once every 4 weeks with a little bit of stuff in it. Your bin is overflowing every week. You're the same size household. They said to me, because nothing happens to it. Why must I bother? So the industry, I think us sitting here, is also guilty that we must give that feedback back to the consumer and say to the consumer, we are recycling. This is what's happening to your Coke bottle. This is what's happening to your bread bag. This is what's happening. And try, because how many times do we hear we don't recycle in South Africa? Because it's not visible. We see waste pickers on the street, and that's what we know. We don't actually know that your shoe soles you're wearing is made from recycled material, that your denim you bought from Woolworths is made from a recycled product. And we need to communicate that much more. So yeah, society, I think, don't know it. They think it's effort. Before you haven't started doing it, it seems like, yes, I must have 2 bins, 3 bins. Where do I keep this stuff? So all of that, we need to make it much easier.
We live in a society, Chandru, maybe you can add on this, that is very environmentally conscientized and aware. You just have to see the stats from Investec and the funds that are flowing into ESG-specific products. Who's driving that? A millennial cohort. We live in a society that likes to wear a badge of honor, that they are doing the right thing for the environment. Are we not tapping into that effectively in the recycling industry to give an incentive, a badge that someone can wear to say, hey, I'm a recycler, and to put it out there and to drive, perhaps using behavioral nudges more than anything else, the kind of behavior that we need to see?
So bless the millennials. And more than them, I don't know how many of you know about Generation Z, who are coming up after the millennials, and I think in the space of the next few years will be globally the largest consuming pocket of people. And the science is showing us that that's exactly what they are asking for. To the extent that this hierarchy of reduce, reuse, recycle has now a new re in it, which is refuse. So for me, a lot of the time, this consumer awareness of recycling is actually almost too late. It needs to start at consumption. And that consumption debate is, firstly, are you buying what you really need? And that probably talks to Andrew's comments about sucking out and emitting carbon. And the second is, have you been mindful that that product you're purchasing, whether it's a plastic bottle or a garment or a cell phone, is it one that's built in with a design aesthetics that's going to allow it to actually be recycled? And I think what we've got to be careful about is globally now they want to actually redefine the word recyclable. So in the old days, and probably till today, recyclable was that you were technically recyclable. And that system's broken. And big organizations in Europe and America are saying, well, let's add a metric to it. That if you can't demonstrate that at least 50% or 60% or whatever that number is collected and recycled, then you should not be allowed to use the terminology that it's recyclable. And that's when you probably get a shift in consumer patterns. And we get to that nirvana of true circularity, that everything that's out there has a life again in the next instance.
There's an issue systemically in the industry that I think is quite interesting. How is it that recycling tonnages and you know, according to the stats, are growing, but the number of companies entering the market grow, but most of the corporates, as far as I'm aware, have left?
Yeah, we only have a handful of corporates in recycling. And yeah, 2 of them have exited the market in the last year, which is, I think, putting very serious notion up. Excluding the PET recycling, which is a mass number name and use capital, The other 295 recyclers that's out there that we know about, there may even be more. But our smaller businesses, they can react quicker, which I think corporates can't. One of the challenges we didn't include on the list is the cost of labor. South African recycling differ considerably from European recycling in that sorting of the non-PETs are done by hand. So someone stands there, so the decision can actually be made quite quickly. Hang on, that company is putting out a product, don't pick that off the conveyor. But your manual dependency, your manual sorting dependency is very high, so your cost of labor. So your corporates are suffering there because they have very strong labor unions present. They're locked into formal sets of rules, where your smaller hands-on recycler can bypass some of that, which is we're not proud of. We're not saying they should be. Out of those 200 recyclers, that's none on the corporate lines that don't have to report. Not all of them are compliant, and we can start listing the things that they're not compliant to, which is not something we can be proud of. We need to fix that. But your corporates are under pressure because they're prominent, they're up there, they need to make sure their wages is right, they're paying all the things that they need to pay, and they do it the right way.
I think it speaks to having appropriate regulation for the market in which you operate. Chandru, do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think let's be mindful this is not unique to South Africa. There are recycling companies globally going out of business. One of the largest PET recyclers in California shut down in Q4 last year. Sydney, I think, Q1 this year. And what we sometimes forget is how we place in a global footprint. And when China closed its doors on the 1st of January 2018, as much as their neighboring countries thought Christmas had come early, they've all started realizing they can't handle the world's waste. And when you start getting those metrics added with a serious reduction in oil prices, you can understand how the business model starts becoming incredibly challenged. And as much as consumers want products that are sustainable and recyclable, the minute you start wanting to charge for it at a fair price, you really start separating the men from the boys. And that's what we're learning with now on global trends. We don't work in isolation in South Africa. We're part of this global metric economically as well as in the recycling community.
Back to your earlier point on packaging and how the packaging industry needs to think about how it responds. What are the most important facets of packaging that will increase recycling, that will lead us more towards a circular closed-loop economy?
So, I mean, Petco and the organization got it up to 66%, and yet we'll talk more about the 34% that wasn't collected. But the work there now is, okay, why isn't that 34% collected? And it's fundamentally for one reason. It's design. Because at the end of the day, any recycling is collect and do what? So I think you're seeing a lot of shift globally with some major brand owners where they're looking at their bottles and saying, well, all right, maybe we need to take the color out of it, David. Maybe we need to look at the kind of label we're putting on, David. And they're actually doing it. And what they're starting to see is the benefit of that, because they've taken care of the hardest part, is this rampant demand now for food-grade polymer. But the only way you can get more food-grade polymer back into packaging is you've got to be mindful about how you design it in the first instance. And from my perspective and what I've seen after being a cynic for many years, David, is that it's actually happening. So I can happily report that we can at least look forward to growing recycling rates, not just in PET. I think there's a gentleman from Unilever here as well who'll talk. They're looking at all their packaging streams. That how do you influence higher recovery rates and reuse rates, primarily funded on design.
Annabé, I want to just bounce back onto Slido here.
David? why are you being anonymous, David?
I'll try to save you there, David. And it's a question about incentives and rewards. And back to your point about wanting us to recycle at source. Do you think consumers will do anything until there's a monetary incentive or reward?
Phew, that's always a difficult one, because my fear is if you pay someone to collect his bottle, and I think you used the deposit system earlier on in one of your examples. The moment that's not there, you're going to stop doing it. I think we've seen some of these, not buyback centres in the Western Cape, they're popular, where you can bring some rubbish and you get a pencil and a pair of shoes, or you get a T-shirt and a book. And the moment you say, okay, now the habit is established, I'm no longer going to get you a T-shirt, keep on bringing your waste, it collapses. So before we're not seeing it as the right thing to do, and extended producer responsibility, I don't know if you're going to come to that, but who is the producer? I'm taking, and Chandru started with that, buy only what you need. If I take responsibility for that packet of frozen veggies I bought, and what do I do now with the veggies? What do I do with the packet? And where do I take it? And each of us really have to start taking accountability. So I don't believe a monetary reward is going to help us there, not at all. Petco did some interesting research on at what LSM level you do, what initiate and what triggers you to recycle. And your very low income levels, they get incentivized by money. So I do think as an industry we need to look at collection systems in really deep rural and poor areas. But if you have a house of a couple of million and you drive a fancy car, I don't believe 5 cents for your bottle is going to help at all. There we need to start saying to you, you do this because it's the right thing to do. And give me the feedback and tell me, what did you do with my bottle and my bag and my pouch and my margarine tub? So I know that it's happening really. But to provide incentives across the LSM levels, I don't think it's sustainable, because how are we going to keep it up? There's not enough money in that system to keep on paying someone to do what he's supposed to be doing.
And maybe in those LSMs you could give someone a badge to put on the outside wall, and they can motivate for their neighbours to be doing the right thing. But back to your point about what we're doing in the smaller and mid-sized towns. We tend to focus on the metros, and there's reason for that. It's where the greater population density is. But do we recycle from the smaller and mid-sized towns in South Africa?
There's some happening, and Chandru can tell where his PET bottles is coming from. You have in small communities, you have someone that had the initiative to start collecting products because he see it either in the media, or someone came to visit him and say, listen, I want to buy that product and that product, get them together for me, once a week I'll send a truck, or once a month, and it's happening. My concern is that it happens for products with high value. Milk bottles gets widely recycled. Plastic film, LD film gets widely recycled. But no one is going to pick up sweet wrappers, to use your example. No one is going to collect bottle caps if they get separated from the bottle. So we need, in those smaller towns, we need other solutions. And Andrew mentioned, I think it was Andrew, Craig mentioned pyrolysis and brick making and pavers. So we need to find solutions in small towns where you say, don't sort, here's the PET bottle and the milk bottle and the bread bag, but the rest of the stuff, bring it to us. We can turn it into a paver, we can turn it into a roof tile, we can turn it into a bit of diesel. So it's happening, but not enough.
Yeah, and innovations like using plastics in road construction, for example. I'm sure I saw a picture of the minister involved in a project like that recently. Chandru, the issue of litter is something that is the most probably visible issue for a lot of people when they think of recycling, when they think of the plastics industry. Is increasing recycling going to help us get a handle on the litter problem? How do you see the way those two intersect?
So litter is what we discard because it has no value. And it's then behavioral issues. I'm no expert on that and why we do it. But in my opinion, if something has value, I mean, if you go to Brazil and, while you're drinking your beer, even before you've had your last sip, there's somebody ready to take it out of your hand because it has value. So when we start, and Annabé was touching on this, assign value to products, there's no reason it'll ever end up as litter. So for me, issues like rigid plastics like PET and HD aren't really the burning issues of the day. It's more these flexibles. I've seen now in the space of the last week, this global movement of phase out sachet. Now, think of a sachet, that's this small and weighs next to nothing. That's a very good chance that's going to end up being littered some way because it has no value in terms of picking up. So going back to that design ethos, that if we can think about how you embed value into a product and not just packaging, you might know clothing and textiles globally is in the spotlight now, companies like H&M and Zara. How do you design in value into a product that it just can never end up as litter in the first place? But if we don't do that, then litter is here to stay globally. It's not going to be unique to South Africa.
And it speaks very much to the role of the broader industry here, and particularly innovation in the packaging space. Annabé, how do you see the role of the greater industry in recycling? If we've got everyone in the value chain here, what role does each individual role player have to play?
I think we need to look at where's my product going to end up. A lot of people, if there's producing polymer, you sell that, or you're producing a milk bottle and you're selling that, or you put the label on the milk bottle and say, this is my brand. Each of those people really need to say, if this product is finished, what will happen to it? I visited a brand, no, not a brand owner, a product manufacturer, and I was collecting some stats on trays, these things you buy your grapes and your strawberries and everything else in. And I said to him, no, why do you bother? I said, I'm trying to get a figure for how much trays we actually make, because that means how many trays are we throwing away. And he looked at me and says, I don't worry about that. I'm trying to get my tray on the shelf. And I think that's the concern. We're often just trying to get my product out there. But each of us in the value chain need to start asking ourselves, what is the end of this product? If we've done the milk thing, or we've done the pellet thing to the factory, what then? And if we start thinking in that, and Sally Ann is talking later on the circular economy, each of those steps in that round circle, we need to ask ourselves, yes, I know the next step, but where is it going to end? What will my actions influence on where this product is going to end up as? Can it be reused? Can it be recycled? Will there be value in it, as Chandru says, that someone will pick it and bring it back? So we really need to start thinking circular. Where is it going to end up?
Chandru?
So I think there's been this wonderful mystical black hole. Is the brand owner responsible? Is the consumer responsible? Is the converter responsible? Is the resin producer responsible? And I think the world we're now living in, David, is that everyone's responsible.
David abuse, by the way.
Everyone's responsible. Why? Because in the old days, we would hear very often, we'd see a horrific neon yellow bottle that would glow in the dark, and we go, look who'd made it, go to the converter and say, how could you do this? Well, Chandru, the reality is if I don't meet consumer demand, my competitor does. I think we're moving into that age now, and government's sort of entering our lives, making it happen, and we're not so sure if that's a good thing. That it's time that everyone in the value chain puts up in their hand and says, you know what, I might lose your business, but I'm not going to make that bottle for you. Why? Because at the end of the day, that's my name along with yours. And this whole thing about the redefinition of who's the polluter. And I think when we look at governments globally that are getting involved in our lives, they're redefining that word polluter. It's no longer the consumer who's thrown it away. It's like, whose name is on it? David. Who made the bottle? David. Who made the bottle top? David. So guess what? Everyone's in it. And I think that thinking about, I'm just going to look at my bottom line and I don't want to lose that business, as Annabé was alluding to, is where things need to change. Everyone is part of that solution.
Annabé, government's role in all of this?
Government need to create the environment in which recycling becomes easier. And we're talking for many years. I think the original Waste Act that came out says by 2016, every metropole in South Africa must have the facility for recycling. I don't know about your diaries, but I'm way past 2016. Then there's a new document coming out. We really need to start saying, how do we, and enforce goes with empower, but how do we make sure our municipalities on their very small towns have a facility where dry and wet waste can be separated and people that want to access the recyclables can access it. So for me, that is key. Government really have to create that environment where it makes it easy if we talk recycling. If we start talking plastics, that's a new topic, but if we focus on the recycling.
There's a question, an interesting question on Slido here, Chandru, for you. Currently, non-PETCO members have access to recycled PET material. Are there plans for the future to regulate the supply of recycled PET to PETCO members only?
I know who asked that question. Is he anonymous?
Most of them are anonymous. Yes, it wasn't David, I don't think. Could have been.
Wow, what a question. I don't think you can. I think we trade in a free market. I think the minute we try and build up walls, which the whole world is doing, we're opening ourselves up to some really difficult questions at the end of the day. But I'm a big believer with consumerism, with governments, whether we like it or not, starting to get involved in our lives. Those free riders won't have long to go. You know, one way or the other, they're going to pay their fair dues as well, either in terms of consumer backlash, because you are not demonstrating your extended producer responsibility, and courtesy of social media, that information will be out there one way or the other, or the punitive taxes of not being compliant will suddenly mean they'll be knocking on every single PRO's door, let me in, let me in. So that's my humble belief.
Annabé, I'm going to ask you to talk on the issue of how we actually dispose of these PET bottles and everything else. We're having a mechanical recycling conversation. Is there space for chemical recycling in all of this?
Absolutely, very definitely. And the circular, and I think Andrew started warming us up to that, you can recycle plastics a number of times. And unfortunately, that's less than 10. I can't even say to you, a number of times. What we so far got away with is to say that we take a product that's 1 day in use, we turn it into a product that's maybe 2 weeks in use. So I take my milk bottle, which in my house is used within a day. I take that, put that in a handy Andy bottle that's going to be used for a month, maybe more. And then I take my handy Andy bottle and I put it in a farmer irrigation pipe that's going to be in use for 10 years. That when that pipe is tired, I bring it back and I put it maybe in a roof tile or in a park bench that's going to last for 60 years. But I can't continuing that process. How many times is that now? 6 or 7 times. We know if you recycle PET bottles, you lose some of the color integrity. So we can, to a certain extent. What are we going to do, and use my example, with all the park benches then after 50 years? And that's where we definitely then say we need to come in with chemical recycling, either capture the energy or get it back to the monomer. And we know the technology exists. If we look at the economy behind it, we all go, it's easier to put up a 20 million recycling plant rather than that. But we have to start looking at that, and chemical recycling is a definite. And I don't see it replacing mechanical, but it's an add-on.
Chandru, I don't know if you've got a particular view on that.
Now that I'm inspired by Andrew, I mean, everyone's got to, again, be mindful of where we are in the world. The technology's out there. They're proving their viability. 2 question marks remain. Are they financially sustainable? And are they environmentally sustainable? They don't come with a 0 carbon cost themselves. The danger is, and what I'm hearing is the scale at which you need to put these plants in. We might not have that quantum of sorted waste that can feed it. And if you do, what then is the financial implication thereof? Because what you must be mindful of is sustainability leaves the building when you cross a certain price point. And you're seeing these, I don't know if you've seen these straws. Not only are they PLA, but they're biodegradable. Snap your finger and it will find the first turtle. I don't know what. These are snake potion opportunists who are jumping in on this wave of emotion that this anti-negative plastic sentiment is spearheading. So I'm not convinced that chemical recycling will work regionally. I think you'll start seeing them in markets like Japan, Sweden, where they have incredibly efficient sorting systems that allows them to have that purity of input feedstock to make them financially sustainable. When you're in Africa or South America or Southeast Asia, we have other challenges. So I would just say be careful. Is it a sustainable solution at the end of the day?
And then I'd just like to conclude on the role of the waste pickers in all of this. And one of the questions on Slido seemed to infer that because there was only one waste picker due to speak, that the industry perhaps doesn't value the waste picker very highly. I certainly, having sat down and had a look through the schedule, just know that that's because of space and time constraints. So how do you view the role of the waste picker in an economy like South Africa's, where we have such high levels of unemployment and such a fragmented system?
So we trade in other African countries as well, and the absolute truth is our businesses are hinged on them. There's just no two ways about it. And that's why there's a bit of concern from them as well that this sudden attention to waste and recycling is actually going to take away from them. Because what are we hearing now? We're going to put up these automated MRFs that's going to allow us to handle a lot more waste. And I think that would be a missed opportunity. I think Annabé might agree with me, not just us, but all recyclers, whether it's PET, plastic, paper, cans, glass. Our foundation rock are these waste pickers. So we should actually look at how we can expand it, make it more inclusive for them, and then see how they participate better in that value chain as well. So for us, without them, I don't think we have a business.
Annabé?
Sorry, I was coughing that so badly just now, and it's still the remnants of it. No, I haven't been to China or to Italy.
Or to Hilton.
The waste pickers, we hinge a lot on them, but we can't face the waste pickers and say that is the solution. If it was the solution, we wouldn't have sit at 60% and 40% and 20%. We need to use that and turn it around. So if I can write a letter to the North Pole and say, Dear Santa, for me it would be to combine the two issues. If we can have wonderful separated waste, so there's a bag of wet organic stuff and all the others, and I can take it to a central point, and it doesn't have to be a multi-million fancy automated MRF, but here's an area where all the recyclables are. Whoever wants to generate an income, you're welcome. We know who you are. You come here, you sort, you pick, you take the PET bottles, you take the polyprop punnets, you take this, and they supply it back into the system. At 4 o'clock, we say, doors closed, please go to your homes. We put in a bulldozer, and everything that's left that haven't been sorted, that's low value at the moment, we feed it next door to an energy plant or a roof tiled plant. For me, that's a win-win situation. It works wonderfully for PET bottles to have someone going through your rubbish and pick out the PET bottles if Chandru buys. If he's not buying that month, they're not picking that, they pick something else. But that small little product in the bottom of your bin that's fully recyclable, that someone wants, is never going to get to him because there's not value for that waste picker to sit there and pick 12 small things. So we need to make that method easier so that the waste picker can stand in one spot and saying, here's all the stuff that I can pick, and very quickly I have my kilo, 5 kilos, 10 kilos of that product. So for me, it's a combination of the two. To rely on the system as it is not going to get us into new heights and a different step.
And just to add on to the packaging conversation, Chandru, does designing a product to have inherently greater value imply adding weight to it? How else would you design a product to have greater value for the picker?
Lars? Where's Lars? So,
and who is David, by the way, for the broader audience?
Coca-Cola.
There we go.
He's left the building, I think.
David's put his hand up. David for Coca-Cola, yeah.
So what are they starting to find out, and I'll use PET as an example, is that yield loss I told you about, 35%, is in developed markets where and a lot of these brand owners have the thing about I'm going to use less virgin. A lot of that is hinging on making the bottles lighter. So what they're starting to find in recycling systems, actually the yields are dropping. So you're not recovering 65%, you now be recovering 60, 55. Two challenges now. One is cost is going up. And number two is how are you going to hope to meet your target? To have 50% inclusion rates of rPET back in your bottles. So there's a new concept now coming out, and it's not just for PET, it's for any product, which is right weighting as opposed to light weighting. And it changes depending on which part of the world you're in. And it's about the inherent value you've built in to motivate someone to go and pick it up. So why is polystyrene the whipping child? Why plastic bags? Why straws? It's not that they're not recyclable. It's just that they're so light, nobody ever picks them up. So if we're not careful, going light and lighter on bottles will start getting us into that realm where it's just not economically viable for anybody to pick it up. And then you challenge the ability to hit your targets of how much good quality recycled material you're going to get back in packaging. So we're trying to tell people, stop talking light weighting and start talking right weighting.
Linked to that is also this consumerism that says, I want a small little packet for now and only now. And I take my own household where you can buy a tiny little bottle that's going to take you 3 days and you're going to chuck plastic away. Or I can buy a nice 5 liter, keep it in my back room and refill my small bottle over and over. If you look at some of the brand owners, they want to give the consumer a little sachet with detergent, enough for 1 bundle of washing. So we're just adding packaging to a stream. Firstly, it's a difficult to recycle product, and it's tiny. No one's going to pick it up. If you give me a nice big bottle or a big pack with inherent value, the chance that it will actually be recycled is much better.
If I could just end on a pitch then, in recognizing our host today, please buy more virgin. Make your bottles heavier.
Sorry, you will get lunch, don't worry.
What say you, Nico?
Please buy recycled.
Well, I think, we might have to have a pitch off, but before we get to that level, I think we've reached the end of this panel discussion, taking you through how exactly recycling works in South Africa. Fascinating, Annabé Pretorius and Chandru Wadhwani. Big round of applause, everyone, for our panelists.
Thank you.